The morning I got married, my father stood in the doorway of my childhood church and told me he would not walk me down the aisle. My groom, he said, was not one of us. He told me to walk alone and think about what I'd done. So I let go of his arm. I waited for the music. And when those doors opened, I was not alone. The man who took my arm was someone my father hadn't seen in 30 years. What my father did at that door, in front of the whole town, is the reason he will spend the rest of his life explaining a name he spent 3 decades pretending he had forgotten. I never raised my voice once. Welcome back to Silent Revenge Stories. This channel is for women who have learned that the quietest person in the room is usually the one holding the truth. If anything I share today speaks to something you've carried alone, you are among friends here. Drop a comment and subscribe. Now let me take you back to the Tuesday I decided to tell my parents I was engaged. I'm Claire Ashton. I'm 35, living in Indianapolis, a little over 2 hours from the farm I grew up on. I left that farm at 18 with 1 suitcase and a half scholarship. I paid for the rest of nursing school working night shifts at a care home. I work hospice now, which means I sit with people in the last rooms of their lives. You learn things in that work nobody tells you when you sign up. Almost nobody regrets the truth they told. They regret the truth they swallowed. The apology they never made. The door they let stay shut. My fiancé, Theo, and I had been together 4 years. He was a large animal vet, the kind of man who could calm a 1,000-pound steer in a panic and then come home and tear up at a phone commercial. On my refrigerator was a photograph, soft at the corners, of a man I called my uncle. People asked about him sometimes. I never explained him. There was a tree in that photo too, a young white oak by a gravel lane, staked against the wind. I had a memory of being small underneath it that didn't match a single story my family ever told. I figured telling my father I was getting married would be the hard part. I was wrong about which part was hard. The drive out to Harrow County is flat and green and honest. Corn on one side, soybeans on the other. The white Ashton farmhouse sits at the end of a gravel lane like it has always been there, because it nearly has. The screen door on the back porch has the same spring it had when I was a girl. It creaks up slow, a long, rusty complaint, and then slaps shut hard. I could find that sound in my sleep. It is the sound of who is coming in and who is being let out. My father, Carl, was at the kitchen table with the grain markets on the radio, the way he has been every morning of my life. My mother, Brenda, was at the stove, already smiling the smile she wears when she's bracing for something. My brother Dale was out by the bins. He'd taken a second mortgage that spring to expand, new grain bin, truck scale, another 40 acres. My mother dried her hands on a dish towel and walked me right back out toward the truck before I'd hardly gotten my coat off. Just don't bring up anything that'll upset your father, she said, low, like a warning between women. I hadn't said one single word yet. I brought Theo out the following Sunday for dinner. I told myself a meal was the fair way to do it. Let them meet the man, not the idea of the man. My mother set out the good plates, the ones with the gold rims that only come down for holidays and funerals. My father shook Theo's hand the way you shake hands with a man selling something you've already decided not to buy. Dale talked weather and prices and wouldn't quite let his eyes land on Theo's face. We were halfway through the roast when Dale's phone went off. One of his heifers was down in the lot, badly bloated. Theo set his napkin beside his plate. Mind if I take a look? He was out there in his good shirt within the minute, sleeves rolled, hands sure. He found the problem, talked Dale through relieving it, saved the animal, and never once made it sound like a rescue. He came back in smelling of the barn and washed up at the kitchen sink like a man who'd done it in that house 100 times. My mother watched him with something close to hope. My father watched all of it without a word. Then he speared a piece of roast and, without lifting his eyes from his plate, said, "Where's he from, exactly?" The room went quiet enough to hear the clock on the wall. That same week, Earl Hollis became my patient. 84 years old. Congestive heart failure. The slow goodbye I know how to keep gentle. Earl had been the county recorder's clerk for more than 30 years, the man who filed the deeds and wills and all the quiet paperwork that decides, in the end, who owns what. He had a memory like a filing cabinet. The first afternoon I changed his linens, he watched me a long time with those pale, watery eyes. "You're Carl's girl," he said. "You favor your grandmother. You favor Vera." I told him I'd take that as the compliment it was. He smiled, and then the smile drifted somewhere I couldn't follow. "I knew that place when there were two brothers on it," he said. I asked what he meant. He looked out the window at the long gold light lying across the fields. "Your grandmother never got what she asked for," he said. "Not at the end. And I had a hand in it. I figured it was the medicine talking. It was neither. The wedding took shape the way weddings do, in small decisions that turn out to be large ones. I wanted it in the church I grew up in. The little white one off Route 9, with the pump organ and the cemetery out back where my grandmother is buried under a stone that says Beloved Mother. My mother heard the plan and got that pinched look around her eyes. "Keep it small," she said. "You know how your father is." I did know. I have always known. Out at the farm, Dale had decided the old white oak by the lane had to come down, right in the way of the new bin and the truck scale. Trees older than the both of us, and he said it like the tree had done it on purpose. I told him somebody planted it. I just couldn't remember who. Dale shrugged the shrug of a man who didn't want to remember either. That night, I lay awake deciding something. I would ask my father to walk me down the aisle, not because I expected him to say yes, but because I wanted to give him one clean chance to be the man I believed in when I was small. And I wanted to see, with my own eyes, what he chose to do with it. I called my cousin Renee, the way I always do when the ground feels uncertain. Renee and I grew up on opposite sides of a silence I didn't yet understand. We found each other as grown women and never let go. She listened to the whole plan, and then she said the quiet thing she's allowed to say and nobody else is, "You sure you want him at the front of that church?" I said he was my father. She said that wasn't an answer. And she was right. 2 days later, at the farmhouse table, I asked him plainly, "Dad, will you walk me down the aisle?" He chewed. He swallowed. He set his fork down so it clicked against the rim of the plate. Then he looked at Theo, not at me. "I won't stand up in front of that church for this." My mother's hands went still. Dale found something fascinating in the bottom of his water glass. "He's a good man, Dad. You saw what he did out in that lot." My father said the words I will hear for the rest of my life. "He's not one of us. You want to go through with this, you go through with it without me. Walk yourself in and think hard about what you're doing to this family." Theo never flinched. He just slid his hand over mine under the table, warm and steady, the way you'd calm a frightened animal. A strange calm came down over me. The calm of a thing you've been afraid of finally happening in the daylight. "All right, Dad," I said. "Then I'll find someone who will." I had no idea yet who that someone would be. The screen door chose that exact moment to slap shut hard in the wind. Before I could even reach the county line, my phone was going off. The family group text, my mother started it for birthdays and harvest schedules, now apparently for this. My aunt on my father's side wrote that I was breaking his heart on purpose, that I'd always had to make everything a production. Dale wrote I was stirring up drama I couldn't take back. A cousin sent a single word, "Wow." My mother wrote nothing in the group at all, which in my family is the loudest thing a person can do. Then she texted me privately, "Please don't make this worse." I didn't answer a single one of them. You cannot win an argument with people who need you to be the villain. The moment you go quiet, they have to look at what they actually said. So I drove. Theo kept his eyes on the road and his hand on my knee and let me be quiet for 40 miles. At a red light in Greenfield, with the phone still going off in the cup holder, I opened my contacts and scrolled past my father, past Dale, past my mother, all the way to a name I hadn't dialed in months. Uncle Eli. 2 days later, I drove to my uncle's place, 2 counties over. Eli Ashton is my father's older brother. He's 64, with my grandmother's same soft gray eyes, and he runs a feed and seed business that half the farmers in his county lean on to get their crop in the ground. His wife Loretta met me at the door with flour on her hands and pulled me into a hug that smelled like a Sunday kitchen. Renee was already at the table. Of course she was. This is where we both drive when something at home breaks. After a while, Eli poured coffee and looked at me over the rim of his cup. Your grandmother used to hum in a kitchen just like this one, he said. She was humming it the last time I ever saw her. Right before your daddy and I stopped speaking. Right before all of it. He set his cup down carefully. There's a part of that you were never told, Claire. Here is the story I grew up on. The year was 1996. I was 4. My Uncle Eli had married a woman named Loretta. Loretta was black. My grandmother Vera loved her on sight. My father did not. There were dinners that ended with chairs scraping back early. A Christmas that simply didn't happen. And then one spring, Eli was gone, off the farm, out of the family. His name folded up small and put away in a drawer nobody opened. The way my father told it, his brother had run off chasing a new life and turned his back on the old one. The way the aunts told it, Eli broke his mother's heart. Nobody ever told it from Eli's side, because Eli was never in the room to tell it. What I have of my own is thin and strange. I remember the white oak being newly planted, a skinny little thing tied to a stake. I remember a tall man lifting me up to see over the pasture fence. And then I remember the man being gone, and the lifting never happening again. The one line that survived every retelling, word for word, the line my father used to close out every version like a door, he's not one of us. That was the story I grew up on. It was missing the one piece that turned out to matter most. Earl was slipping faster now. Some afternoons he was sharp as a tack, others he drifted out on the tide and didn't come back until evening. On a sharp one, while I took his pulse, he caught my wrist with a hand like a dry leaf. Your grandmother came to me before she passed, he said. Vera drove herself down to the courthouse, sick as she was, and she told me she wanted that land split even between her 2 boys. Even, she said it twice so I'd be sure I had it right. I asked what happened to what she wanted. His eyes filled and spilled over and he didn't wipe them. It didn't happen that way. Papers got signed in the weeks after that. Never should have been signed, and I'm the one who filed them. I knew better the whole time, and I filed them anyway because Carl Ashton was a hard man to say no to, and I was a coward in a small county. He sank back, worn through. I kept copies, he said. All these years. In case somebody ever came along who'd do right by it. Come back Thursday, nurse. I'll have something to put in your hands. I drove home that night with my grandmother's name going around in my head. And under it, that tune I still couldn't quite catch. I asked my Uncle Eli to walk me down the aisle on a Sunday afternoon on his back porch, with Loretta snapping beans into a colander beside us and the cicadas going in the trees. I said it the way you say the truest things, fast, before you can talk yourself back out of it. Will you give me away? He went quiet a long time. Claire, he said finally, if I walk through the door of that church, your father is going to see a ghost come back from 30 years gone. The whole town is going to see one. I said maybe the town needed to see a ghost. Maybe a ghost was just the truth standing up where everybody could look at it. Loretta reached over without looking up from her beans and put one hand flat on his arm. Eli, she said, in the voice of a woman who has waited a very long time for a particular door to open. The girl asked you a question. Don't make her ask it twice. He looked at his wife. He looked out at his own fields. Something 30 years old shifted behind those gray eyes. Let me think on it, he said. But I already knew. You don't say you'll think on the very thing you're going to say no to. You just say no. My mother caught me alone in the church parking lot after a planning meeting. She'd driven all the way from the farm just to find me standing there in the gravel. I need to say something to you, she said. And I need you to never repeat it to anyone. In that flat lot light, She looked older than I'd ever let myself see her, every one of her 63 years sitting right there on her face. Your grandmother, she started. Vera. She wanted things a certain way. With the land. With her boys. My breath snagged in my chest. What way, Mama? She opened her mouth and for one long second the whole truth came up and stood right there behind her teeth, 40 years of it, ready to fall. Then her face eased shut slow, like a screen door let down gently so it won't slap. Some things are better left in the ground, she said. With her. She got in her car. I stood in that empty lot long after her taillights were gone. My mother had not been cruel all those years. She had been afraid. And fear that old stops looking like fear from the outside. It just starts to look like silence at the supper table. Dale came to see me himself next, which he never does. He drove the whole 2 hours into the city and stood in my doorway with his cap turning in his hands like a man come from a funeral. I hear you've been out to Eli's place, he said. He came in but wouldn't sit. Wouldn't take the coffee. He just stood in the middle of my front room, filling it up. I mortgaged everything to expand this spring, he said, and his voice dropped. If Eli's name comes back up, if anybody down at the county starts asking how the title got to be the way it is, the bank gets nervous. A nervous bank can call a loan. The whole operation's at risk. I looked at him steadily. What exactly are you scared somebody's going to find, Dale? He couldn't quite meet my eye. Just keep him away from the wedding. You bring that man back here, you're not just ending a wedding. You're ending the farm. Then he put his cap back on and drove 2 hours home in the dark. I stood there and turned it over, and I noticed the one thing he'd been careful not to say. He never once said it wasn't true. He only said it would cost him if it came out. Thursday came. Earl was propped against his pillows, clearer than he'd been in a week, the way some folks rally bright right at the very end. He told me to look in the bottom drawer of the bureau, underneath the winter quilts. I knelt and dug down and found a worn manila folder gone soft as cloth from 60 years of careful hands. Inside, a copy of my grandmother's will, dated, signed, and witnessed, leaving the home place to her 2 sons in equal shares. Clipped behind it was a quitclaim deed from 1996, signed by Eli in a shaky hand, signing his entire half away for almost nothing. Dated just 3 weeks before Vera died. When she was already too sick to sit up. Your daddy brought Eli into my office grieving and scared and shamed, Earl said, and told him this was what their mother wanted, that it kept the peace, that it was the honorable thing. It was no such thing. He pressed his hand flat on the folder. Your grandmother's wishes are still on record down at that county. They never went anywhere. They're sitting right there in the books. Somebody just has to walk in and know to ask the right question. 3 nights later, he was gone. But the folder was already in my hands. The wedding rehearsal was the following Friday evening, the whole wedding party there, the pastor walking us through the order of things. My father came, which surprised me, until I understood why. He came to make his point in front of an audience where it would do the most work. When the pastor asked gently who would be walking the bride, my father stood up from the folding chairs. I've made myself clear on this matter, he said, loud enough to carry to the back of the hall. I won't be any part of it. And I'd think long and hard, Claire, about who you're choosing over your own flesh and blood. You want to march yourself down there with your decision? Then you walk alone. Walk alone and think about what you've done to this family. Then he crossed that hall in front of everyone, shoved open the side door, and let it slap shut so hard the panes rattled in the windows. The whole room sat inside that sound. My maid of honor reached over and found my hand. Theo stood very still at the front, watching me, not saying a word, because he knew I didn't need rescuing. I needed witnessing. My father drove off thinking the bang of that door was the last word on the subject. It wasn't even close to the last word. It wasn't even the right door. I want to stop right here for just a second. If you have ever had someone hand you a condition for their love, be this, marry that, stay quiet, keep the peace, and felt the floor tilt under your feet, then you already know exactly what that church hall felt like. Stay with me. What happened when those big doors finally opened is the part one waited my whole life to tell out loud. Comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Let's keep going. The county seat is a 40-minute drive from the farm. Eli drove us himself, the manila folder flat on the back seat like a thing that might wake up if we jostled it. Sandra Ortiz kept a small office above a hardware store with a window looking down on the courthouse square. She was maybe 50, gray at the temples, and she listened to the whole story without once interrupting, which is how you know someone has done this work a long time. She went through the folder page by page, the quitclaim, the copy of Vera's will, Earl's handwritten note about the date the deed was recorded. She tapped the recorded deed and said the date was the part that mattered. A transfer signed while the grantor's mother was dying, and her own will said something different, was exactly the kind of thing a court could be asked to look at. Then she set the pages down and looked at both of us over the top of her glasses. "Give me a week," she said. "I'll pull the recorded deed and the probate file from the courthouse myself and tell you what is really here. And until I do, not one word to your father, your brother, or anyone who shares a fence line with them." She called on a Thursday, 6 days later, and asked us both to come in. The probate file confirmed the rough shape of Earl's story. Vera's will, the real one, divided the home place evenly between her two sons. The 1996 quitclaim had been signed in the same season Vera was failing, and the will had never been formally administered. Sandra was careful with her words. She did not say we would win. She said the transfer was the kind of thing a court can reopen, that between the timing, the unadministered will, and the question of how a grown man came to sign away his birthright in the worst year of his life, there was a real argument for undue influence. Presumptively voidable, she said. Not a sure thing. I wrote those 3 words on the back of my hand in the parking lot so I would stop rounding them up into a promise. Then Sandra asked Eli the question that mattered, "Do you want me to file now, or do you want to wait?" Eli looked out her window at the courthouse a long moment. "File it after," he said. "My niece is getting married Saturday, and I am not walking into that church carrying a lawsuit. I waited 30 years. The lawyers can wait 1 more week. I told one person before the wedding, and I told her by accident. My Aunt Ruth caught me on the phone the next evening, asking about flowers, and somewhere between centerpieces and the seating chart my voice cracked and the whole thing came out, Earl and the folder and Eli and Sandra and the 3 words on the back of my hand. Ruth was quiet so long I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, in a voice I had never heard her use, that she had a cedar chest at the foot of her bed. Inside it was every Christmas card Eli had mailed her for 30 years. 1 a year, never missed. Each one signed by Eli and Loretta, and then later by Eli and Loretta and Renee. She had kept them where Carl would never look. "I have been waiting 30 years, she said, for somebody in this family to open a door instead of slamming one. Bring your uncle, Claire. I will be in the second pew, and I will stand up so fast it will scare people." I sat down on my kitchen floor when she said it, because for the first time, the thing I was about to do stopped feeling like a grenade and started feeling like a homecoming somebody else had been praying for, too. My father, meanwhile, was working the only room he still controlled. He called the pastor twice. He called 2 men on the church board, men he'd farmed beside for 40 years, and told them his daughter was making a spectacle, dragging old family business into a house of worship. He did not say the word race. He never said it to anyone whose opinion he needed. He said spectacle and family business, and after everything we've done for that girl. Pastor Reeves called me Thursday night, gentle and tired, and told me my father had asked him to have a word with me about the tone of the day. I asked the pastor one question, "Reverend, has my father told you who he once kept out of that church and why?" A silence on the line. Then the pastor said he had not asked for particulars, and that maybe it was time he did. My father expected the church to close ranks around him the way it always had. Instead, Pastor Reeves told him only, "We'll see, Carl." Which is the most dangerous sentence a careful man can say to a man used to getting his way. The night before the rehearsal dinner, Eli came by the rental house Theo and I had taken near the church. We sat on the back step while Theo and Loretta did dishes inside. The white oak came up the way it always did with Eli. He'd planted one just like it the spring before he left, a sapling no thicker than his thumb, down by the lane where the surveyor's stakes for Dale's Newbin now stood on the disputed half. I said something bitter about Dale, and Eli stopped me with his hand. I never came for the land, Claire, he said. I came for my brother. I spent the first 10 years angry and the next 20 just missing him. I would trade every acre of that place for one Sunday where Carl looked at Loretta and saw a daughter. Sitting there on that step in the dark, I finally understood the difference between losing a fight and refusing to have one. My uncle had refused for 30 years to become the small thing my father needed him to be. If you're still with me, do me one small favor and tap that subscribe button, because what happens next is the part the whole story was built toward. These big doors are about to open. Let's finish this together. My mother made her last stand in the church parking lot after the rehearsal, when everyone else had driven off and it was just the two of us and the long blue Indiana dusk. She had been crying before she found me. I could tell. She used the word begging herself. I am begging you, Claire. Do not bring Eli into that church tomorrow. Your father will not survive it in front of these people. If you do this, you will break this family in one afternoon, and it will be on you. And there it was, the oldest trick in our house. Taking the thing the man did and setting it down gently in the lap of whatever woman was standing closest. I looked at her for a long moment. I almost told her I knew about Vera's will. I almost said, you knew. You knew the whole time and you let him keep it. But her face was so frightened I could see the girl she must have been 40 years ago, choosing the house over the truth because the house was warm and the truth was cold and she was young. So I only said, Mama, I am not breaking this family. I am opening it. The break happened in 1996. You all just learned to walk around it. She put her hand over her mouth. Please, she whispered. I can't lose all of them in one afternoon. It was the truest thing she'd said to me in years, and it was still a request that I be the one to keep losing instead. Earl Hollis died the night before my wedding, a little after 11, with his window cracked the way he liked it, so he could hear the corn. I drove the dark county roads back out to sit with him a while before they took him. He looked smaller than the man who had handed me that folder. I held his cold hand and thanked him out loud for telling the truth at the very end of a long life of keeping other men's secrets. Then I drove back to the rental house and sat in the dark kitchen, and the doubt came for me the way it always comes, late and quiet and reasonable. What was I doing? Walking into my own wedding and detonating it to prove a point a dead man told me in a folding chair? I thought about my mother's face. I thought about the whole county turning to look. Theo came down and found me at 2 in the morning. He didn't tell me it would be fine, he never lied to me, not once in 4 years. He just put the kettle on and sat across from me in the dark. For 1 hour, I nearly called my uncle and told him to stay home. I nearly gave my father the quiet wedding and the kept secret and the family that walks around the break. I had my phone in my hand. What turned me was not anger, and I want to be honest about that, because anger would have been easier to explain. What turned me was a memory of being 4 years old at the farm the summer before Eli was gone for good, and how he had lifted me up to see a clutch of barn kittens in the loft and never once made me feel like a bother. The family had erased him so completely that I'd spent 30 years thinking the warm uncle of my childhood was something I'd half invented. He was not invented. He was robbed. And then he was hidden. And I had very nearly agreed to hide him one more day for the comfort of people who had never once protected me the way he had, with a ladder and a litter of cats. So I did not call him to stay home. I watched the dawn come up gray and ordinary over a soybean field, drank Theo's tea, and when it was time, I went upstairs. My grandmother's hymnal was on the dresser where I'd set it, the one within the garden marked by a ribbon gone soft with age. I put on Vera's earrings, the little garnets my mother had passed to me without ever mentioning they'd been Vera's first. I looked at myself in the mirror a long moment. Then I drove to the church. The church off Route 9 is small and white and has stood through 130 Indiana winters. That morning it filled up the way it only does for weddings and funerals, which in a small county are often the same crowd in different clothes. I waited in the bride's room at the back with Renee fixing my veil, her hands not quite steady. And through the wall, I could hear the organist warming up, running her fingers through the old hymns, and then settling, of all the songs in all the books, on in the garden. My grandmother's hymn. I had not asked for it. Renee went still beside me when she recognized it, and we looked at each other in the mirror, and neither of us said a word, because some things you don't dare name out loud for fear of breaking them. Out in the sanctuary, my father had arrived early in his good gray suit, working the pews like a man running for office, accepting the soft condolences people offer the father of a bride, performing a calm he did not feel. He was certain of how this would go. He was certain I would either lose my nerve and let him walk me, his hand heavy and victorious on my arm, or walk that aisle alone in front of the whole county, shamed, proving his point with every solitary step. Those were the only two endings he could imagine. They were the only two he had ever left me. The wedding coordinator put her head in the door. "It's time, honey. Is your father walking you, or are you going alone?" "Neither," I told her. Her face did a small confused thing. Then the music swelled, the ushers put their hands to the big double doors, and the doors opened. The light came in behind me first, the way it does, so for 1 second the whole church saw only a shape in the doorway. And then they saw the shape was not one person but two. Eli stepped up beside me in a charcoal suit older than my cousin, pressed flat that morning, and he crooked his arm. I slid my hand through it. We stood there, one held breath in the open doorway, while a church full of people turned in their pews to see who was giving Claire Ashton away. I heard the recognition move through the room like wind through a field. Row by row, the older faces first. A hand went to a mouth 3 pews back. Somebody's hymnal slid off a lap and hit the floor. And under his breath, only for me, so quiet I felt it more than heard it, my Uncle Eli began to hum the hymn the organist was playing. My grandmother's song. The one his mother used to hum at her kitchen sink in a house he had not been allowed to enter in 30 years. We took the first step together. And from somewhere near the front, in the ringing quiet, one old man's voice said the thing the whole room was thinking, "Is that Eli Ashton?" My father came up out of his pew like the floor had thrown him. He was loud in a way you are only loud when you have lost the thing that kept you quiet. He pointed down the aisle at his own brother and said it, the sentence that had run under this whole family for 30 years like a buried wire. "He's not one of us. He hasn't set foot in this county in 30 years. He doesn't belong in this church. He doesn't belong on that arm. Not one of us." The same 4 words he'd used on Loretta in 1996. The same 4 words he'd used on Theo at the dinner table. Now spent in public, at full volume, in front of every soul he'd ever wanted to impress. And here is the thing I had learned. The thing my whole calm life had been teaching me. I did not match him. I did not raise my voice to my father's volume, because the moment you do that, the room stops listening to what's true and starts watching 2 people fight. I let his shout hang there in the rafters and get small. Into the quiet after it, Aunt Ruth stood up in the second pew, just like she'd promised, so fast it scared the woman next to her. Then Pastor Reeves's wife stood. Then an old farmer named Whitfield who'd known both brothers as boys. Then a whole row. Then another. People standing, not in anger, but in witness, until my father was the only man left on his feet for the wrong reason, in a church full of people on their feet for the right one. I looked at him down that long aisle and kept my voice low enough that the room had to lean in to catch it. "You told me to walk alone, Dad," I said. "And think about what I'd done." I thought about it. And I decided not to. Pastor Reeves is not a young man. He has buried and married half this county. He read that room in about 4 seconds, the way only an old shepherd can. He did not call for order. He simply lifted both hands the way he does over a christening, and said in a voice that filled the room without ever rising, "Friends, we are here this morning to witness a marriage. Shall we continue?" And the room, still standing, said yes, in that low collective murmur that is more powerful than any shout. And they sat. And Eli walked me the rest of the way down the aisle while the organist, bless her, played my grandmother's hymn all the way to the front. He placed my hand in Theo's. He did not glare at my father as he passed him. He just gave Theo's shoulder one squeeze, the way an uncle does, and stepped into the front pew beside Loretta and Renee and Ruth. My mother sat one section over, frozen exactly between the husband still standing and the daughter at the altar, belonging fully to neither. Which is the country a person ends up in after 40 years of silence. Theo took both my hands. Just before we said our vows, he leaned in, only for me, and said the truest small thing anybody said all day. Your grandmother would have liked the music. The reception was in the church parlor, sheet cake and coffee urns and folding tables, the way weddings are done out here. And my father did not have the sense or the grace to go home. He found Eli by the coffee, with a knot of old men around them who remembered, and he made his last play in front of all of them. You came back for the land, he said. 30 years and you show up the minute there's a wedding and a chance to grab the home place. That's what this is. That's all this ever was. The parlor went quiet, because it was at last the real question. The one under everything. I had the manila folder in my bag. I had carried it all day without quite knowing why. I took it out, and I did not wave it or slap it down like a lawyer on television. I just set it flat on the table between them, the recorded deed, Vera's true will, Sandra's careful notes, and I left my hand resting on top of it a moment. Let it sit there being a fact. My uncle looked at the folder. Then he looked at his brother, and he said it the way he'd said it to me on that back step, except now the whole room got to hear the truth of him. I never came for the land, Carl. I came for her. He nodded at me. For her. And for any kid in this family who ever got told they weren't one of us. Across the parlor, my brother Dale went the color of skim milk, because Dale alone understood exactly what was in that folder, and what an unadministered will and a clouded title would do to the second mortgage he'd signed against land that had never cleanly been his to borrow against. I watched him set his coffee down very carefully. The way you set something down when your hands have started to shake and you don't want anyone to see. Old man Whitfield, who had stood up in the church, looked from the folder to my father and back. Carl, he said, in the flat way old farmers say the thing that ends an argument, is that Vera's will? My father didn't answer. He looked at that folder the way you look at a dog you were sure was dead. For the first time in my life, my father stood in a room full of people who had known him 40 years, and he did not have a single line. He opened his mouth once. And shut it. What I felt watching him was not triumph. It was the strange flat quiet of watching a thing that has loomed over your whole childhood turn out, in the end, to be just a frightened man beside a coffee urn. Sandra Ortiz filed on Monday morning a petition to reopen the administration of my grandmother's estate and set aside the 1996 transfer. I will tell you plainly that it is not finished, because real things do not finish the way stories do. Presumptively voidable, not a sure thing. Those were still the words. But a clouded title is a clouded title from the day it's challenged. Within a few weeks, once the title company picked up the recorded challenge, the bank quietly froze the undrawn portion of Dale's expansion loan, pending the question of who actually owned the ground the new bin was going on. My father kept that land for 30 years by making sure nobody ever asked the right question in front of the right people. He could not survive 30 minutes of the right question asked out loud in a church. The community did what communities do, slowly, without announcement, which is reorder itself around a truth once it can no longer be unseen. People who'd nodded at Carl in the feed store started nodding a little less. And my mother's 40 years of silence, the silence she'd spent to keep her house warm and her marriage whole, came due all at once, with interest, in a single Saturday afternoon. A few weeks after the wedding, we gathered at Eli and Loretta's place, 2 counties over. A low brick house with a deep porch and a lane lined in oaks. Eli, Loretta, Renee, Aunt Ruth, Theo, and me. Ruth brought the cedar chest of Christmas cards and we read some of them out loud on the porch. We laughed. A couple of us cried. Down by the lane, the white oak Eli had planted as a boy at the home place had a cousin here, a big one, decades in the ground, because of course the man had planted another the first spring he had land of his own. It stands. Whatever the court finally says about the acres back in Harrow County, that tree stands. And the one at the home place sits on the half the deed says was always Eli's. And Dale's grain bin will have to find another spot.